Hello and welcome to Sage's Tabletop Talks. I'm Sage, this is my Table Talk, and I'm going to talk to you about tabletop role-playing games. So let's discuss the age-old debate among tabletop role-playing groups of Crunch and Fluff, and which is right for you. And the honest truth is, you want a little of both. What I have honestly found is that older gamers, I give myself to an extent, but people have been gaming for quite some time, you know. People like me who've been gaming more than 20 years. I have 25 here, thereabouts. You know, people 30, 40 years. They tend to like their games a little crunchier. Whereas newer gamers seem to be heavily involved in the fluffier elements of games. There's obviously exceptions to these rules. I, for one, kind of like a lot of fluff in the games, but I'm sure I've lost some of you, so let's talk about what is crunch and what is fluff. So, what it comes down to is mechanics versus world building, lore building. Crunchier games like GURPS, Mech Warrior, older editions of D&D, they have a lot of rules, a lot of tables, a lot of math, a lot of charts. And even if the rules are fairly unified, like they are in GURPS, 3d6, roll underneath a target number, GURPS is almost entirely focused on what rules you use in certain situations and how they apply to other rules. How does rolling an attack roll and your weapon damage affect your opponent's parrying and hit points? Whereas fluffier games like, let's say something like Tales of Equestria have very, very little rules and are far more worried about building a character that fits into this kind of lore. Like, you know, they talk about things like currency, you know, the 3 types of species, whatever, like in Tales of Equestria, the 3 types of ponies you can play as: earth ponies, unicorns, and Pegasuses. I like Pegasudes. Interesting thing about Pegasus is that the idea of a winged horse being called a Pegasus actually isn't true. There was only one winged horse that Perseus rode, and its name was Pegasus. Pegasus was a proper noun, like Steve or Kevin or Sarah. Pegasus was its proper name. But anyway, which is why there isn't a real good plural for Pegasus, because there was no plural of Pegasus in Greek mythology. But anyway, but like Tales of Equestria has a lot of emphasis on how characters interact with the world and things like that. And my cat, who ignores me 6 and 3/4 days a week, has jumped up on the table because, for whatever reason, she decides to only come visit me when I record. Anyway, but yes, as I was saying, a game like that has a lot more to do with what a Pegasus role, R-O-L-E, is in the world that they've created, whereas in GURPS, something like Thrown Weapon is much more interested in mechanically how throwing a weapon, how the dice rolls and throwing a weapon interacts with other rolls, like an opponent's ability to dodge, or opponent's health, or what have you, or things like how doing hacking acts with another character doing hacking, or a static computer's defense system. So that's kind of the difference between fluff and crunch. Crunch is hard mechanics, fluff is kind of lore. All games have an element of both of those. If your game has no crunch, you're not playing a game. It's just a kind of weird form of collaborative storytelling. And if your game has no fluff, you don't have a game, you have a fucking math textbook. And it's so funny because people who tote GURPS, which those people are weird anyway. People who obsess over GURPS. I mean, George R.R. Martin obsesses over GURPS, and this is a dude who decided in his fantasy world he was going to write about underage children having sex because of realism in his realistic world with realistic zombies and realistic dragons. You are a, no air quotes, fucking creep. But yeah, people who gush on GURPS, they often comment on how the game is so universal and you can do whatever you want in the game. Except for I own GURPS, and that's just not true. If you play the game, rules as written, I mean, I can make Dungeons and Dragons into a sci-fi game if I wanted to, you know. You just replace fucking longswords with lightsabers and, wizards with Jedi, and I've got a Star Wars game. Like, not that big a deal, guys. But anyway, okay, I opened right to the page I needed. But, you know, there's rules about tech levels in GURPS, where it's like, okay, a TL7 means that they have access to more or less modern Earth technology. And TL Tech Level 10 means they have access to interstellar travel, which means that the game, by trying to disguise it as a rule, has created a fluff where technology progresses in a very human manner. It means you cannot, rules as written, create a world where FTL, spaceships, and hypercomputers have existed, but just happens that gunpowder was never discovered. So even though, you know, characters can travel across stars, they don't fire guns at each other. Just guns never existed. Or like lasers. So characters still fight with swords and axes. Which might seem like a weird thing, but that could be a cool world you could build. Like, oh yeah, no. Characters can fucking travel between the stars. But, you know, combat is still done with bows and swords. And they might have, like, really cool, like, specialized metals for swords. But because gunpowder and beam weapons just were never discovered, then that's just how the world works. But GURPS doesn't let you do that. GURPS has very, very stringent rules on how magic, psionics, and technology works. Meaning it has, in and of itself, created a form of fluff. It just hides it in... pretending to be... It hides it within the crunch. But there are still very, very specific world-building elements within GURPS. And when it comes to fluff, once again, you know, very few games pretend to be zero crunch because we are still playing a game, and a game by definition has to have mechanics. Even non-role-playing games have fluff. You know, you play a game like Risk, there is lore there. You are a leader building an army attempting to take over the world. It's very, very minimal fluff, but it is fluff. But yeah, so that's kind of the difference between fluff and crunch. And now really the question comes down to how much crunch and how much fluff do you want? And obviously this is going to be a question that depends on the gaming group. And crunch and fluff are often interlinked with each other. I know last week I talked about racial absolutism and racial essentialism, and the idea that certain races are built within this monoculture, this thing that all these people are like this, or even just heavily tend toward this. But it actually makes a very useful example of blending fluff and crunch, because if we take High Elves from, I have the 5th edition D&D. I actually don't have a physical copy of 2024 yet. I'm honestly debating on if I do buy one, I'll have to buy one secondhand somewhere, because you know, giving money to wizards or give it as a gift. Because, you know, handing money over to a company as awful as WotC is not something I'm really interested in. Even though I really like 2024. I have a friend who has a copy and we play. That's actually what we play. The one campaign I'm actually currently active in. Unfortunately, I wish I had more, but unfortunately time has gotten in my way. But in the game, in 5th edition, the old 5th edition, 5.0, I'm going to talk about high elves. As a high elf, you have a keen mind and mastery of at least the basics of magic. So what does that mean mechanically? It means nothing mechanically. It is entirely fluff. All it does is it creates a picture of what a high elf is within the worlds of Dungeons and Dragons. They kind of go into like the Valley Elves of Greyhawk and the Sun Elves of the Forgotten Realms. And there is differences between these worlds, but they are all very firmly within kind of this Dungeons and Dragons sphere. This very D&D like orb. There's differences, but at the end of the day, there's not a whole lot of differences between these worlds. And I know I'm going to get a lot of, well, actually, but there really isn't. Comparatively speaking to other fantasy, you know, comparing Dragonlance and Forgotten Realms to each other, the differences are minute if you were to take something like Dying Earth or Conan the Barbarian or even Lord of the Rings. Because, as a secret, D&D is not a Lord of the Rings simulator, and it never was, and it never will be. You will not make Lord of the Rings and Dungeons & Dragons. It's just not a thing that happens. Anyway, there's a little kind of fluff argument for you, like... but anyway, yes, so that's fluff. Now, to somewhere else. Elf ability. Cantrip. You know one cantrip of your choice from a wizard's spell list. Intelligence is your spellcasting ability for it. So you have access to a single 0-level spell that you just know. You just know a level 0 spell, just straight up. Now, what does that mean fluff-wise? I mean, it does mean something fluff-wise. It means that as an elf, you know magic. But that is very, very minuscule. That is entirely mechanical. When you pick elf, you get slotted level 0 spell. That's mechanically how that works. You put the two together. You have a keen mind and master of at least the basics of magic, meaning you get access to this level 0 spell. You also get intelligence increase because, generally speaking, the game wants you to be a wizard with an elf, a high elf. And so getting that intelligence increase kind of feeds into that. But at the end of the day, that is kind of the idea, is that you want to mix, you want your mechanics to reflect, you want your crunch to reflect your fluff. But now, alright, I keep going on divergences, but what is the proper balance for your game group? And unfortunately, kind of understanding crunch and fluff is something you just have to experience. And even if you're a experienced player, let's say you've been playing, you know, the last 8 years, an experienced player, but all you've played is Dungeons and Dragons, you don't really have a lot of practical knowledge of what a system like Blue Rose or Danger Patrol would be like. Just because you haven't really spread out to these kind of other systems and seen how crunch and fluff interact with each other within these systems. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with sticking to the system that you like as a casual player. I've known people who want to get into this, this is a different story. But anyway, and I do kind of, when I talk about games and stuff, I feel like I do what I can to help players understand what they're getting into when they get into a game, get into D&D culture, get into certain aspects within Dungeons and Dragons culture. And honestly, that's kind of one of the reasons I restarted this, was to help people find the place to escape the D&D prison, to find some other things to do, to play, other ways to even play D&D. So it's not something that can easily be described, but it is something that can easily, or can be kind of experienced. And the honest truth is, most people have played Dungeons & Dragons, and if they haven't played D&D and they're tabletop gamers, they've almost certainly played a shit ton of White Wolf, which are far crunchier than D&D, despite what White Wolf players want to pretend. There is a lot of lore within White Wolf games, but the mechanics are just so hand-tying that it's hard for me to see them as anything much more than a very, very gamey game. And a lot of the lore in the game actively dismisses the mechanics of the game. Like, for example, if you were to play Exalted, and it's like, oh yeah, 5, difficulty of 5 is, world class, like only an elite few can do it. And literally every single person at the table is like, oh yeah, I got 62 successes, so, meaning that the DM has to arbitrarily increase that threshold, so the number 5 is no longer some elite number that can only be reached by very few, because everyone at the table can, quadruple that, and in order to create a threat, you have to constantly throw things at them that match their threat level, meaning the game's fluff and the game's crunch are at odds with each other. And when you're playing a game, and that's the case, the crunch will usually win, because, once again, it is a game, and it has to be played. But I guess the real thing is with your group, if you want to kind of, if you find yourselves constantly ignoring certain rules because you think that they're just kind of getting in the way of your gameplay, things like fatigue rules, rest rules, a lot of skill checks you just are kind of hand-waving away because you find that the act of rolling those rules are getting in the way of your experience. You're probably wanting to look at if you're looking to get out of D&D, look at games that are a little rules lighter, a little fluffier. And also, if you find yourself kind of digging into the rules, like if you find yourself reading the Dragonlance books because you find the world building within these to be so even though Dragonlance is within the D&D sphere, you're probably wanting games that are a little fluff. Oh, if you watch the D&D movie, Honor Amongst Thieves, and you're like, oh man, this is such a good reflection of what Dungeons & Dragons is, you're probably going to want a game that's a little rules lighter, because the God's honest truth is the D&D Honor Amongst Thieves movie really does not hold a candle to the game mechanically. It's a great movie to reflect Faerun. Like, if you want a Faerun movie, great. But if you're looking at a game that actively reflects what the D&D gaming experience is like, Honor Amongst Thieves is not even close to anything that you would be able to do rules as written. Like, honest to God, like, there's a number of things that happen in the movie, like, with Dorix, where she keeps shape-shifting. There's no possible way to get that many shape-shifts within within that span of time. But it looked cool, and it fit the theme of the character as this, very natural character. or the scene where they use the illusion of Chris Pine and it starts to melt. Nothing in the game could possibly reflect that. You can't reflect that, rules as written in the game. So mechanically speaking, the movie is terrible. But if you find that is a mimic of how you play D&D, you're obviously just ignoring most of the rules and playing what's fun. Which is fine, of course. Like, I mean, it's your game, and if you're having fun, that's what it's about. But if you're looking to escape, find some games that are a little rules lighter. I constantly praise a game like Danger Patrol, which is kind of rules light and free, and a lot of fun. And its world is. I see how we're kind of getting across because it has a world, it has a setting, but a lot of that is hidden in the mechanics. Things like the atomic and the cyborg are very interesting in the way they allow the player to build this world. Or even games that are mostly setting, like what is it? I think it's called Golden Sky Adventures, where you play Henji. You play little fox and pigeon spirits, and you help kids deal with everyday problems. And the game is very fun and fluffy and cute, and mechanically very laid back. Or even a game like, and I know this is a red flag, and I'm probably going to be put on some lists for it, but I actually have played it and enjoyed it one time. A game called Maid, where you play maids in a whatever setting, and the game's mechanics are just very loosey-goosey and crazy. Or a game like Toon, which is probably the suggestion I should have given, that doesn't have nearly as many red flags flying. Because, like, it's nowhere near as kind of grossy and perverted. Like, the fact that I went to Maid is, like, big old red flag flying right here. Anyway, but yes, however, if you find yourself really digging into what game mechanics means, and honestly, it like power gamers and min-maxers, munchkins, or even you're somebody who likes to experiment with rules, swapping D20s for 2D10 or 3D6. Maybe changing the way certain spells or certain class mechanics work, because you find that you mostly want to see how they function with these changes. And a lot of people do that. Like, I really, really like to do that. Unfortunately, a lot of people I play with don't like to do that. So it's kind of difficult for me to be like, okay, here's the new rule. We're going to play, but we're going to use 2D10 instead of D20. And be like, but my criticals. And it's like, yeah, criticals are going to happen a lot less often. So obviously we're going to need to make a way to make criticals more important. So now you got to play with that. But I enjoy that immensely. Or, new ways of rolling stats, 3D, 2D6 plus 6. I like 2D6 plus 6. I think that's a good way of rolling stats, because it pushes the averages up, but still allows a lot of variance in design, which is something that Pathfinder 1E suggested. They call it the heroic method. Really like that method. But experimenting with things like that is something I enjoy, and which is odd because I actually do tend to like fluffier games better than crunchier games to actually play. I like crunchier games to fiddle with. But like, if you're somebody like that, like me, who enjoys the way the math interferes, like, I'm a big fan of MechWarrior. MechWarrior is a crunchy as fuck game. There's a lot of lore in MechWarrior, so I don't want to discount the fluff within MechWarrior, but to actually sit down and play MechWarrior, you're going to be involved a lot more with the mechanics than you are what your character is. Once again, honestly, that's a video for another day. The idea of role playing and the idea of role playing, ROLE playing, and role playing, ROLL playing. You know, people who want narratives versus munchkins who are. That's a video for another day, and it's mostly just because it's a lot of bullshit that the TTRPG community, especially newer TTRPG people, really like to put pressure on. This idea that role-playing and mechanics are somehow separated from each other. It was really, really bad in the beginning, and it's really, really bad now. And it's a lot to do with snobbery. People who want to feel like they are more important than the systems, I guess. Like, oh, so you want to sit there and make your character as powerful as possible, but you just don't understand what the game is about. Actually, if they're sitting there digging into the mechanics of the game, trying to figure out the best way to make a character what they want to be, they're probably more into the game than you are, but that's a discussion for another day. But yeah, anyway, so yeah, if you find yourself really into the math of the game, you probably want, you know, and you want to break out, crunchier games. I'd never suggest anyone play Rifts, but like maybe a Mech Warrior or Shadowrun might be something that's a little more up your alley. Don't anybody ever play Rifts. It's weird, and people who are obsessed over Rifts are weird. Like, this is one of the few things within the community I will fucking gatekeep. That Rifts players are some of the weirdest fucking players I've ever met. And maybe you're not. Maybe you're the exception to the rule, but overwhelmingly, not the meanest and not the weirdest, certainly the gatekeeperiest players, and just the weirdest players. Like, not even like creepy perverted, just, I don't even know how to describe it. People who just want kind of like up their own ass and snobbish and just really seem to hate tabletop role-playing games. They're all the GURPS players. I don't know, and I mean, I know what it is. It's because GURPS itself attracts that kind of mentality. But yeah, don't fucking play GURPS. Don't get into the fucking GURPS shit. But anyway, yeah, and like I said, one of the big things is the biggest way to understand if you like crunchier or fluffier games is to try some games. There's a lot of games out there that are either Creative Commons, free to play, free to learn, free to get, or exceptionally cheap. You know, games that aren't going to cost you $150 to buy in. Games that'll cost you maybe $30 and a set of dice. Because once again, you know, I know times are tough. I know that, unfortunately, WotC doesn't get this, but I get this. Times are tough, and we all need an escape, and the D&D community is a little too strong because there's just not enough breakaway from Dungeons & Dragons. Another reason I started this channel. Yeah, I mean, and if you want some suggestions of either fluffier or crunchier games, I'd be happy to answer comments in the comments down here. But yeah, so I guess that's it. Like, the discussion on fluff and crunch, what they are, and what it means to you as a player. But yeah, it's about half hour, and I realize me sitting here rambling for much longer than that is probably gonna get boring, so I will see you guys next week, and we'll see what topic I come up with then. Bye.